Mark and Lisa had been looking forward to their weekend escape. They had found a beautiful, secluded lake house on a rental site. A rustic wooden cabin perched right on the water's edge, with a private dock stretching out onto the glassy surface of the lake. It was perfect, or at least it seemed that way. The first night was peaceful. The air smelled of pine and damp earth. The stars reflected in the still water. They spent the evening on the deck, sipping wine and listening to the gentle lapping of the lake against the shore. But as the clock edged toward midnight, Lisa shivered. "It's getting chilly," she said. "We should go in." Mark was about to agree when he saw something. A figure standing at the far end of their dock. It was a man, or at least it looked like a man. He was tall, motionless, his clothes dark and clinging to his body as if they were drenched. His hair hung in wet strands over his face, and he was just standing there, staring. Lisa followed Mark's gaze and let out a small gasp. "Ooh, who is that?" she whispered. Mark felt his skin prickle. He stood, waving cautiously. "Hey, can we help you?" No response. The figure didn't move, didn't blink, just watched. Lisa grabbed Mark's arm. "Let's go inside." Mark hesitated, then nodded. They stepped backward, never turning away from the figure, and locked the door behind them. They didn't sleep well that night. Mark kept getting up to check the dock, but by the time he gathered the courage to look out the window, the figure was gone. Maybe just some drunk local, he told himself. Maybe he wandered off. But the next night, the figure returned. This time it was closer, standing not at the end of the dock, but halfway down it. Still soaked, still silent. Mark's stomach tightened. He grabbed a flashlight, threw open the back door, and called out, "Hey, what the hell do you want?" The beam of light fell across the dock, but the man was gone. No esplas, no retreating footsteps, just empty, glistening wood. Lisa had been researching the property online. When Mark returned inside, she looked pale. "You're not going to believe this," she said, turning the screen toward him. There, in an old newspaper article, was a headline. "Local man vanishes in lake. Body never recovered." The article was nearly 10 years old. A man named Daniel Whitmore had lived in the very cabin they were renting. One night, he took his rowboat onto the lake and never came back. His boat was found floating near the dock, empty. His body was never found. Mark looked at the grainy, black and white photo of Daniel. It was him, the same soaked figure that had been standing on their dock. That night, they locked every door and window. But something about the air felt wrong, thick, heavy, oppressive. At 3 a.m., Lisa woke up with a start. Drip, 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 water, somewhere in the house. She shook Mark awake. "Do you hear that?" Mark listened. The sound wasn't coming from the bathroom or the kitchen. It was coming from the hallway. With growing dread, he reached for his phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam fell on the wooden floor outside their bedroom. And there, leading from the back door to their room, were wet footprints. Bara footprints. And the door was still locked. Lisa let out a choked gasp. "He's inside." Mark's pulse pounded. He swung the flashlight toward the bedroom door, just in time to see the handle start to turn. Slowly, deliberately, Mark leaped up, pressing his weight against the door. The handle jerked violently. The wood groaned as if something on the other side was pushing with impossible force. Lisa fumbled for the rental cabin's emergency number. But before she could dial, the pressure on the door stopped. Silence. After a long minute, Mark gathered his courage and yanked the door open. Nothing. Just a single, wet footprint fading into the wooden floor. They left the cabin at dawn, threw their bags into the car, and didn't look back. When they reported the incident to the rental company, the woman on the phone went quiet. Then, in a hushed voice, she said, "You should have never opened the door." Mark and Lisa never returned, but every so often, they checked the rental listing. The lake house is still there, still available. And in some of the newer photos, if you look closely at the dock, you can see a shadowy figure standing at the edge, waiting. Some say spirits remain where they met their end, trapped in a loop of endless searching. But others believe that ghosts are not just remnants of the past, but warnings for the living. So if you ever find yourself renting a lonely cabin by the water, and if late at night you hear the soft drip of unseen footsteps, lock your doors, stay away from the dock, and whatever you do, never open the door. This story comes from a man named Eric, who, along with his friends, decided to rent a lake house for a quiet summer getaway. The place was picturesque, an old wooden cabin sitting right at the edge of the water, with a small dock leading out onto the lake. A boathouse stood nearby, its heavy wooden doors locked shut. They had no reason to go inside. The rental owner had mentioned that the boathouse was off-limits, used for storage. It was old, barely maintained, and more of a hazard than a convenience. But that first night, something made them notice it. The knocking. It started just past midnight. The group was gathered on the porch, swapping stories and watching the moonlight ripple over the lake when the sound cut through the night. A slow, deliberate knocking. 3 steady taps. At first, they thought it came from inside the cabin, but as they fell silent, they realized it was coming from the boathouse. A heavy, rhythmic knocking against the wooden walls. One of them joked nervously, suggesting it was just the wind shifting the old structure. But Eric felt a chill crawl up his spine because the night was perfectly still. The air was thick, unmoving. No wind. No reason for the wood to groan or shift. Someone or something was knocking from inside. They did what any group of rational, slightly tipsy vacationers would do. They grabbed a flashlight and walked toward the sound. The knocking stopped as soon as they approached. The silence that followed was even worse. They stood there, half laughing, half waiting for something to happen. One of them grabbed the padlock and gave it a shake. It was secure. There was no way anyone had gotten inside. The group exchanged uneasy glances before deciding to let it go. Maybe it was just the old building settling, the way houses creak in the night. They returned to the cabin, locked the doors, and tried to forget about it. But the knocking came again. This time at 3 a.m. Louder, more insistent. The next morning, sunlight stretched across the lake, pushing away the eerie atmosphere of the night before. The group decided to check the boathouse one last time, just to ease their minds. When they reached the doors, they saw something that made their stomachs drop. A trail of wet footprints, barefoot, leading out of the boathouse. The prints were uneven, as if someone had stepped hesitantly onto the dock, the moisture bleeding into the old wooden planks. But they didn't lead toward the cabin. They didn't end at the water's edge, either. They led onto the lake and stopped. What happened that night? Who or what was inside the locked boathouse? And how did it leave a trail of footprints without a boat in sight? There are a few possibilities. The most rational explanation? A trick of the mind. A combination of paranoia and the eerie atmosphere of the lake house playing tricks on the group. But that doesn't explain the footprints. And it certainly doesn't explain the knocking coming from inside a locked space. Then, there's the local legend angle. Many lakes have their stories. Tragic accidents, forgotten spirits, old superstitions about those who drowned and never found peace. Some say that when the dead return to familiar places, they don't walk like we do. They follow the path they remember, even if the ground is no longer there. Could have been a spirit retracing its steps? A restless soul that used to walk the dock before the water took it? The idea is chilling, because if the knocking wasn't just a coincidence, then maybe something wanted to be let out. The group never got answers. The knocking never came back, not while they were there at least. But they never forgot what they saw. A trail of footprints leading nowhere. A presence inside a locked space. And a reminder that sometimes the past doesn't stay buried beneath the water. Sometimes it knocks, waiting to be noticed. For years, Mark had dreamed of owning a lake house, a place where he could escape from the chaos of the city, where the only sounds would be the wind in the trees and the soft ripple of the water. So when he found a small, rustic cabin for sale at a shockingly low price, he didn't hesitate. It sat on the shore of a quiet, secluded lake, the kind of place where time seemed to slow down. He moved in at the end of the summer, excited for crisp autumn nights and peaceful mornings. The first few weeks were everything he had hoped for. He spent his days hiking through the surrounding woods, fishing off the dock, and sitting by the fireplace with a book. At night, he would fall asleep to the distant call of owls and the whispering hush of the water. But then something changed. It started on a windless night. Mark had just settled into bed when he heard it, a faint, rhythmic creaking. It was subtle at first, almost blending into the natural sounds of the lake. But as he listened, it grew clearer. It was the unmistakable sound of wooden oars cutting through water, their slow, deliberate movements echoing in the stillness. Confused, he sat up and peered out his bedroom window, which overlooked the lake. The water was dark, black as ink, reflecting the stars. And there, barely visible against the surface, was a rowboat. It was moving, drifting toward his dock, but there was no one inside. Mark's stomach tightened. The boat glided forward, oars rising and falling in perfect mechanical strokes. But there were no hands gripping them, no figure sitting in the boat. It was as if an unseen presence was guiding it across the water. His first thought was that it had somehow come loose from a neighboring cabin. Maybe the wind had pushed it toward his shore. But there was no wind, and the oars weren't being carried by the current. They were moving with purpose. Then, just as the boat reached his dock, the oars stopped. The water stilled. The boat bobbed slightly, knocking softly against the wooden planks. Mark felt a chill crawl up his spine. He waited, heart pounding, but nothing happened. No shadowy figure emerged. No splash of something slipping into the water. Minutes passed, and the boat remained eerily silent. He told himself it was just a trick of the light, just his imagination playing tricks on him. Maybe there had been someone in the boat, and they had simply ducked out of sight. But when morning came, and he stepped onto the dock to inspect it, the boat was gone. Over the next few nights, the same thing happened. Always at the same time, just past midnight. The creaking of oars, the slow, steady movement across the lake, the boat drifting toward his dock before stopping. And then nothing. Mark started to feel a growing sense of unease. He asked his nearest neighbor, an older man named Tom, if he had ever seen the boat. Tom's face darkened, his expression unreadable. "Best to ignore it," he said flatly. "Don't watch it. Don't go near it." Mark pressed him for details, but Tom refused to say more. Just shook his head and muttered something about old things in the lake that don't like being disturbed. That night, Mark sat by his window, watching, waiting. As expected, the boat appeared. It rowed itself closer, the sound of the oars impossibly loud in the dead silence. This time, Mark grabbed a flashlight and stepped onto the dock. The second his foot touched the wood, the boat stopped. The oars froze in midair. He hesitated, feeling as if unseen eyes were locked onto him. Then, the boat began to drift backward. Slowly, it receded into the fog, vanishing into the darkness of the lake. Determined to get answers, Mark dug into the history of the lake. He learned that decades ago, a man had lived in the same cabin. A fisherman who rode out every morning before dawn and returned at dusk. One night, during a terrible storm, he had gone out onto the lake and never came back. His boat was found the next day, floating aimlessly in the water. His body was never recovered. Some say his spirit never left. That every night, he still rows his boat across the lake, searching. But for what, no one knows. Mark never approached the boat again. He took Tom's advice, he ignored it, and eventually it stopped coming. But sometimes on still, windless nights, he swears he hears it. The faint, rhythmic creak of oars in the darkness. The sound of something unseen rowing toward his shore. Perhaps, just perhaps, the silent rowboat is still searching, waiting for someone to finally step inside. It started as a peaceful getaway. Laura, a photographer, had been feeling creatively drained, so she booked a secluded cabin by a quiet, glassy lake, hoping the stillness of nature would reignite her inspiration. The place was perfect, rustic but well-kept, the kind of setting where the world felt hushed, where time slowed, and where she could be alone with her thoughts. The first few days were uneventful, just Laura wandering the shoreline with her camera, capturing the eerie beauty of the place, the way the trees curled around the water's edge, the mist that rolled in at dawn, the way the lake mirrored the world so perfectly, almost too perfectly. It was on the third evening, just before sunset, that she noticed it. She had been taking self-portraits, using the lake as a natural backdrop. At first, she thought it was just her mind playing tricks on her, but when she looked closer, her reflection was delayed. She turned her head to the left, and in the water, her mirrored image followed, but just a second too late. She raised her hand to brush her hair back, and again, the reflection lagged behind, mimicking her movements like a faulty video feed. Laura frowned, stepping closer. The surface of the water was perfectly still. There were no ripples, no distortions, nothing that could explain the delay. Yet, the unease settled deep in her stomach, spreading like ice. Maybe she was just overtired. Maybe it was just a trick of the light. That night, she tried to brush it off, but an uneasy feeling settled over her. The wind howled outside, and the old wooden walls of the cabin groaned softly in the cold. When she finally drifted into sleep, her dreams were restless, of the lake stretching infinitely, of something moving just beneath its glassy surface. The next morning, she woke up feeling heavy, as if she hadn't slept at all. As she walked toward the kitchen, she froze. There on the wooden floor, leading from the front door to her bedroom, were wet footprints. Her stomach twisted. She lived alone. The door was still locked. And yet, the prints were there, bare feet, damp, leading from the outside, and stopping right beside her bed. A chill ran down her spine. Something about them was off. The prints weren't just wet. They were darker, like whatever left them had brought something up from the lake's depths. Waterlogged, thick, almost inky. Had someone been inside her cabin while she slept? She checked the door again. It was still bolted. The windows were locked. There were no signs of forced entry. But the footprints. She forced herself to breathe, to rationalize. Maybe she had stepped in some water without realizing it. Maybe she was just tired. But as she knelt down, touching one of the prints with trembling fingers, she realized something horrifying. The footprints, they matched her own. For the rest of the day, Laura couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching her. The cabin's walls felt closer, the air heavier, the lake outside somehow wrong. She debated leaving, packing up, and driving back to the city. But she convinced herself she was being paranoid. That night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, every creak of the cabin sending a fresh wave of unease through her. Eventually, exhaustion won. Her eyes shut, and then she heard it. A soft tap. Talp! Talp! Her eyes shot open. The sound was coming from outside, from the direction of the lake. Slowly, heart pounding, she climbed out of bed and tiptoed toward the window. The moon cast a pale light over the water, and for a moment, everything seemed still. Normal. Just the lake, the trees, the wind. Then she saw it. A figure, standing at the water's edge. Her. The reflection in the lake wasn't just a reflection anymore. It stood on the shore, staring at the cabin with blank, unblinking eyes. Its head tilted slightly, the same way she had done when she first noticed the lagging reflection. But this time, she wasn't the one moving. It was... Laura stumbled back from the window, her breath coming in sharp gasps. She didn't dare look again. She grabbed her car keys, threw on her jacket, and bolted out the door, not caring that it was the middle of the night. She didn't stop driving until the lake was miles behind her. What did Laura experience in that lake house? Was it a glitch in reality? A doppelganger trying to take her place? Or was it something ancient? Something that had lived in the lake long before the cabin was ever built? Many cultures have legends of water spirits, of reflections as portals to another realm. Some say that if your reflection moves on its own, it means something else is looking back at you. What do you think? Was it simply exhaustion playing tricks on Laura's mind? Or did something crawl out of that lake that night? Something wearing her face, waiting for her to return? Tell me your thoughts in the comments below. And if you ever find yourself by a still, glassy lake, be careful where you look, because sometimes the reflection isn't yours anymore. The Harrison family was looking for an escape. After months of stress and long work days, they wanted nothing more than a quiet retreat, somewhere far from the city. The lakeside cabin had glowing reviews, secluded, peaceful, the perfect place to unwind. It was an old structure, but well kept, with a wraparound porch that overlooked the water. The air smelled of pine, the kind of fresh crispness you could never find in the city. It was everything they had hoped for, at least during the day. The first night, David and Emily Harrison sat on the porch with their two kids, Lily and Max, listening to the chirping of crickets and the occasional rustling of branches in the wind. It was a perfect evening. That is, until Max spoke up. "Who's that?" David followed his son's gaze toward the lake. At first, he didn't see anything, just the moon's reflection shimmering against the surface. But then, a man, standing knee-deep in the water, his back slightly hunched, his arms hanging at his sides. He was facing the house, unmoving, silent. "Hello," David called out. No response. Emily's grip on her wine glass tightened. "Maybe he needs help," she whispered. David stepped off the porch, taking a few cautious steps toward the dock. "Hey, Mun, you okay?" The figure did not answer, did not move. David hesitated. Something felt wrong. The man was too still. Not even the water around him stirred. It was as if he was standing in a photograph, frozen in time. Then, without warning, he vanished. Not in a way a person might duck under the water. No splashing, no ripples, nothing. 1 second he was there. The next he was gone. A heavy silence followed. Emily ushered the kids inside, locking the door behind her. David stood on the porch for a long time, staring at the empty lake, his pulse hammering in his throat. Had he imagined it? The next morning, David told himself he must have been tired. Maybe his eyes were playing tricks on him in the moonlight. But that night, as they sat on the porch again, Lily let out a sudden gasp. "He's back." David felt his stomach drop. The man stood in the exact same spot, knee-deep, unmoving, watching. Emily pulled out her phone, using the flashlight to illuminate the shore. The light passed over the figure, and for a brief moment, they saw him clearly. His clothes were old, tattered, his skin pale and bloated, his eyes hollow. Then he disappeared beneath the surface again. No sound, no deepes. Emily turned to David, voice shaking. "We're leaving tomorrow." That night, neither of them could sleep. The kids, thankfully, had dozed off, but Emily lay rigid beside David, listening for any sign of movement outside. Around 3 a.m., David got up. A part of him needed answers. He stepped out onto the porch, the wooden boards creaking beneath his weight. The lake was eerily still, a vast mirror under the sky. And then he saw them. Footprints. Wet, muddy prints leading from the shore to the porch steps. His breath hitched. They stopped just before the door, as if someone had stood there, watching. The next morning, they packed in a hurry. Emily had already found a hotel in town, and they planned to drive out as soon as possible. Before they left, David stopped at the small general store down the road to return the cabin keys. An old woman at the counter looked up at him, her expression knowing. "You saw him, didn't you?" she asked. David hesitated. "Saw who?" The woman exhaled, as if she'd had this conversation before. "Years ago," she said, "that lake flooded. There was an old settlement before the dam was built. Families lived down there, but they were never able to recover everyone." She shook her head. "Some say the drowned never left." David swallowed hard, gripping the keys in his fist. He didn't ask any more questions. He didn't want the answers. They never returned to the lake house. But sometimes, when David closes his eyes, he still sees him. The man in the water, standing there, waiting. It was supposed to be a fresh start. Adam and Lisa had spent years searching for the perfect getaway, a quiet lake house to escape the noise of the city, to raise their young son in the kind of place where the nights were still and the stars were endless. They found it nestled deep in the woods, perched on the edge of Stillwater Lake. The locals were friendly, welcoming, but they carried a wariness that Adam didn't quite understand. "The lake's got its stories," an old man at the general store told him. "Things happen here that ain't got no good explanation." Adam brushed it off. Small towns thrived on superstition. But there was something unsettling in the way the man's eyes flicked toward the water as he spoke, as if making sure nothing was listening. The first night in the lake house was quiet, almost too quiet. No sirens, no distant hum of traffic, just the occasional lapping of the water against the dock. Then, at exactly 3 a.m., Adam woke up. No reason, no sound had disturbed him, just an eerie awareness that something outside wasn't quite right. From the window, he could see the dock, and someone was standing there, a lone figure silhouetted against the water. The man was old, wearing heavy boots and a fishing hat pulled low over his face. His hands moved slowly, methodically, as he cast a fishing line into the blackness. Adam's first thought was that it was a neighbor, but something about the way the man moved sent a chill through him. It was too precise, too practiced, like he had been doing it for years, maybe decades. And yet, he never reeled in the line, just cast again and again into nothing. Adam watched for a few more moments before stepping away from the window. By morning, the fisherman was gone. No footprints on the dock. No sign that anyone had been there at all. The next day, Adam mentioned the fisherman to a neighbor, an older woman who had lived by the lake her whole life. Her face went pale. "You saw him," she whispered. "Did he turn toward you?" Adam fronit. "No, he just was fishing." The woman exhaled, relief washing over her face. "Don't ever let him see you," she said. "If he turns to face you, someone in your family will drown before the week is out." Adam tried to laugh it off, but the weight of her words lingered. He went home, telling himself it was just an old folk tale. But that night, at 3 a.m., he woke up again, this time with the heavy feeling that something was staring at him. The fisherman was there again, casting his line. Only this time, he had stopped. He was standing motionless, facing the lake, but Adam could feel it, an awful, crawling sensation that the man knew he was being watched. Slowly, his head began to turn. Adam yanked the curtains shut. The rest of the night passed in anxious silence. He told Lisa in the morning, but she laughed it off. "It's just your imagination," she said. "You're letting that old story get to you." Adam wanted to believe her, but when he walked down to the dock later that day, something made his stomach drop. The fishing line was still in the water, not moving, not drifting, as if something beneath the surface was holding it taut. The next night, Adam refused to look outside. But at 3 a.m., a sound woke him. Knocking. It wasn't on the door. It was coming from outside, soft, deliberate knocks against the wooden planks of the dock. As if something was tapping, waiting to be let in. Adam held his breath. The knocking stopped, and then came the footsteps, slow, heavy, moving up toward the house. Lisa stirred. "What's that?" she murmured. Adam didn't answer. He couldn't. He was staring at the bedroom window, because outside, just beyond the glass, something was standing there. A shadowed figure in a fishing hat. The world seemed to hold its breath. And then, the fisherman lifted his head. Adam slammed his eyes shut, but it was too late. The air felt heavy, wrong, like something ancient had just sealed a deal. The next morning, his son's toy boat was floating in the lake, far from shore. He had never taken it outside. Adam and his family moved out of the house within the week. They never spoke about what happened again. But before they left, a neighbor came by to say goodbye. "I heard about your sighting," he said grimly. "You know, the fisherman wasn't always a ghost." Adam hesitated. "What do you mean?" The old man sighed. "He was real once. Used to fish this lake every morning before sunrise. Until one day, he didn't come back. They say he fell in." Adam gised. The man shook his head. "No, they say something pulled him under." Silence stretched between them. The wind rustled the trees, and somewhere, across the water, a fishing line plunked into the lake. Some say he's still waiting for someone to take his place. For Adam and Jake, the idea of a weekend getaway at Jake's uncle's old lake house seemed perfect. Just two friends, some beers, and the silence of nature. They weren't the type to believe in ghost stories, but the town nearby had plenty to tell about the lake. The locals had superstitions, old warnings. People said the water was deeper than it should be, that things sank and never surfaced again, that sometimes the lake held on to things, refusing to give them back. The two ignored the rumors. The first night at the lake house was uneventful. They grilled burgers, shared stories, and joked about the haunted lake. But then, the second night came, the night they'd never forget. That evening, they found an old canoe in the cabin's shed, its faded red paint peeling at the edges. "It still floats," Jake shrugged, though he eyed the long, jagged crack along the bottom. The wood looked warped and ancient, but the inside was dry. Good enough. They paddled out, the lake eerily still around them, the sun sinking into the horizon. The water reflected the dimming sky like a black mirror. A few minutes into the lake, Adam noticed something strange. "Hey," he muttered, looking back at the shore. "We're still tied up." Jake turned, his stomach dropping. The canoe was still chained to the dock. The realization hit them like a punch. The heavy iron chain, which should have anchored them to the shore, remained fixed to the dock, stretching impossibly into the water. Yet they were out in the middle of the lake. Jake reached down, dipping his hand into the water, feeling for resistance. There was none. The canoe moved freely, but the chain, unbroken, was still attached. Then the air around them changed. The temperature seemed to drop, their breath suddenly visible. The once peaceful silence turned into something oppressive, a void so deep it rang in their ears. Adam, gripping the sides of the canoe, muttered, "We have to go back." They turned, paddling with everything they had, but the canoe barely moved. The dock looked further away now. The trees, once right along the shoreline, were gone, replaced by an endless stretch of dark water. "We're not getting anywhere," Jake panted. That's when the first knock came. A hollow, resonant thud from beneath the canoe. Adam froze. "Did you hear that?" Another knock. This time, slower, more deliberate, as if something beneath them was feeling out the underside of the canoe. Jake leaned over slightly, peering into the water. It was pitch black, reflecting nothing. But then, deep below, something shifted. A pale shape, a hand. A third knock, this time from inside the canoe. Adam and Jake scrambled, paddling wildly, but the canoe wouldn't budge. The water around them darkened further, as if ink had been spilled into the lake. The chain still led back to the dock, unmoving, defying logic. Then the canoe tilted. Something was pulling it down, slowly. A force beneath them, unseen but undeniable, dragging them toward the depths. The cracked wood creaked, and Adam realized something horrifying. The crack wasn't leaking water, and it was letting something out. And then a whisper, soft, gurgling, not from above, but rising up through the crack in the canoe. "Let go." A hand shot up from the water, grasping the edge of the canoe. It was bloated, pale, with nails worn down to nothing but jagged stubs. Adam screamed, grabbing the paddle and slamming it down. The hand vanished, leaving behind only ripples. Suddenly, the chain snapped. The canoe lurched forward violently, sending them backward. They paddled, adrenaline giving them unnatural strength. The trees returned. The dock was suddenly just a few feet away. And then, impact. The canoe hit the shore with a force it shouldn't have had. They scrambled out, panting, looking back at the lake. The canoe was gone. The water was perfectly still, as if nothing had ever happened. The next morning, they searched for the canoe. It wasn't in the shed. It wasn't anywhere. When they asked Jake's uncle about it, the man went pale. "We haven't had a canoe in years." Jake's blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" His uncle swallowed hard. "We lost it in an accident. It cracked and sank. My brother was inside." Adam and Jake never spoke of that night again. But they both knew one thing. The canoe hadn't let go of them. Not really. It had come back, if only for a moment. And whatever was inside it had wanted them to stay. Water holds on to things. Memories. Secrets. Sometimes, things that should have drowned refuse to stay beneath the surface. The next time you visit a lake house, take a look at the water. Watch for things that shouldn't be there. And if you hear something knocking from beneath your boat, don't look down. It started as a peaceful getaway. A small family, James, his wife Melissa, and their 7-year-old daughter, Lily, rented a secluded lake house deep in the woods. The house sat on the water's edge, its back porch overlooking the lake's vast, dark expanse. During the day, the lake was beautiful, its surface shimmering under the summer sun. But at night, it became something else entirely. James was the first to notice it. Lying awake in bed the first night, he heard something strange. A soft, distant sound coming from the water. At first, he thought it was just the wind rustling through the trees or the gentle lapping of the lake against the shore. But the more he listened, the clearer it became. It was whispering, not the indistinct hum of the breeze or the rhythmic sound of moving water. This was different. It was hushed, urgent, almost like voices speaking just below the surface. The next night, Melissa heard it too. She stood on the porch, staring out at the lake, her skin prickling as the whispers floated toward her on the humid night air. The voices were soft, almost unintelligible, but they were there. She swore she could hear them calling a name that sounded eerily close to Lily. The couple tried to rationalize it. Perhaps it was a trick of the acoustics, the way sound traveled over water. Perhaps it was distant campers, their voices distorted in the night. But deep down, neither of them believed that. Then, on the third night, Lily heard it. She stood barefoot at the water's edge, her little head tilted to the side, listening. James and Melissa found her there, whispering softly, responding to something unseen. When they called her name, she turned with wide, glassy eyes and said, "They want me to come closer." James grabbed her and pulled her inside. Melissa demanded to know who she was talking to, but Lily only smiled and whispered, "The ones in the water." That night, the whispers grew louder. James and Melissa lay awake, listening as the voices became clearer, more distinct. They weren't just whispers anymore. They were words, phrases spoken in hushed, desperate tones. Come back. It's so cold. Lily, join us." A sudden splash outside made James jolt upright. He rushed to the window, heart hammering. The lake was completely still. There was nothing there. No ripples. No movement. But then, just as he was about to turn away, he saw them. Figures. Dark, shadowy figures standing waist-deep in the water, barely visible against the moonlit surface. Watching. Waiting. And then, from the blackness, a sound that made his blood run cold. Lily's voice. Not from her room. Not from inside the house. From the lake. "Mommy? Daddy?" The voice called softly. But it wasn't right. It was hollow, distant, like an echo distorted by water. James turned to Melissa, but she was already moving, already running to Lily's room. Lily was there, fast asleep in her bed. But outside, from the lake, the voice called again. "Come play with me." Melissa clapped a hand over her mouth, stifling a scream. James yanked the curtains closed, his hands trembling. Something in the water, something not their daughter, was calling to them. They decided to leave the next morning. Packing their bags before dawn, they loaded the car in a panicked rush. But as they hurried down the porch steps, Lily stopped. She was staring at the lake, her small body rigid. Then, in the softest whisper, she said, "They don't want us to go." The moment the words left her lips, the air grew heavy. The water, so eerily still, suddenly began to ripple. Not from the wind, not from a boat, but as if something just beneath the surface was moving. Rising, James grabbed Lily, throwing her into the car. Melissa jumped into the passenger seat, slamming the door shut. As James turned the key, he stole one last glance at the lake. The figures were there, dozens of them now, standing motionless, their dark shapes blending with the water, heads tilted slightly, watching as they drove away. They never spoke about it again. They never went back. But even years later, James swears he still hears it sometimes. The whispers. Soft. Calling. Waiting. The legend of the whispering waves is not unique to this family. Across the world, there are countless stories of haunted lakes, of water that holds memories, of voices that call from the deep. Some say spirits of the drowned linger where they took their last breath, trapped between worlds. Others believe water itself is a conduit, a place where the veil between the living and the dead is thinnest. But one thing remains certain. If you ever find yourself by a lonely lake at night, and you hear your name whispered across the water, don't answer. It started as the perfect getaway. Matt and Lauren, a couple from the city, rented a lakeside cabin deep in the woods for a much-needed break. Their rental was cozy, old, but charming, sitting just along the water with a view of the dense tree line that surrounded them. The first day was uneventful, spent unpacking and enjoying the peaceful isolation. But that evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, they decided to take the kayak out onto the lake. The water was calm, glass-like, reflecting the deep oranges and purples of the sky. It was quiet, eerily so, Even the usual sounds of birds or rustling leaves seemed muted, as if the forest was watching. That's when Lauren saw it. Just beyond the thick tree line on the far side of the lake, partially hidden behind overgrown brush, stood a cabin. It was small, dark, and unmistakably abandoned. The wood looked warped with age, and its windows were pitch black, like empty eye sockets staring out toward the water. The structure was old, so old that it seemed to lean slightly, as if weary from time itself. "Look," Lauren said, nudging Matt. "That place doesn't look safe." Matt turned the kayak slightly for a better view. "Must have been a hunting cabin or something," he said. "Creepy, though." But the longer they stared, the more unsettling it became. Something about the cabin felt wrong. There was no path leading to it, no dock, no signs of human presence. Yet it didn't look entirely abandoned. It was as if it had been waiting for someone to notice it. Lauren shivered. "Let's go back." They paddled away, the sense of unease lingering. That night, as they sat by the fire, Matt mentioned the cabin to their host, an old man named George who owned the rental property. "We saw an old cabin on the other side of the lake," Matt said. "Do you know anything about it?" George's expression darkened. He didn't speak for a moment, just stared at them like they had told him something they weren't supposed to. "There ain't no cabin over there," he said finally. Lauren frowned. "No, we definitely saw one, right on the edge of the woods." George shook his head. "Ain't been no cabin there for a long time." The way he said it made the hair on Lauren's arms stand up. "A long time. Not never, but a long time." Matt laughed nervously. "Maybe we just saw a trick of the light." George didn't laugh. "Maybe," he muttered, then added, "best leave it alone." Curiosity got the better of them. The next morning, after breakfast, they decided to hike to where they had seen the cabin. It wasn't far, maybe a 15-minute trek through the woods. But when they got there, nothing, just an empty clearing. The cabin was gone. No structure, no walls, no roof. Just a patch of earth, thick with moss and overgrown weeds. But something had been there once. The outline of a foundation was barely visible beneath the dirt. Pieces of old, rotted beams jutted from the ground like broken ribs. And then Lauren noticed something that made her stomach drop. A rusted, iron door hinge, half buried in the soil. She turned to Matt, her voice shaking. "We saw it. We saw it here." Matt swallowed hard. "But how? How does a whole cabin disappear overnight?" Lauren took a step closer to the remains, and that's when she felt it, the overwhelming feeling that she wasn't alone. The woods were silent, suffocatingly still, and yet she felt watched, not just by something hidden in the trees, but by the place itself. Something wanted them to leave, and they did. What exactly did Matt and Lauren witness that evening? There are a few possibilities, each more chilling than the last. 1. A residual haunting. One theory suggests that what they saw was not a physical structure, but an imprint of something that once stood there, a ghostly echo from the past. Many believe that strong emotional or traumatic events can leave behind residual energy, replaying over and over like a broken record in time. Could they have seen a glimpse of a place long since destroyed? 2. A time slip. Time slips are rare, but terrifying phenomena where people momentarily step into the past. In this theory, the couple saw the cabin as it once was, a brief window into another era. But when morning came, they were firmly back in their own time, and the cabin no longer existed. 3. The vanishing house phenomenon throughout history. There have been accounts of entire houses appearing and disappearing overnight. These stories often involve abandoned locations, shifting structures, or buildings tied to tragic fates. Could it be that this cabin was never truly gone, just waiting for the right moment to show itself? 4. A warning. Some believe that certain places have a way of protecting themselves. Perhaps whatever remained in that clearing did not want to be found. The cabin revealed itself, just long enough to be seen, but not long enough to be questioned. And when they returned, it had retreated back into the unknown. The story of the cabin that wasn't there reminds us of something deeply unsettling. There are places in this world that do not follow our rules. Places that exist in the gaps between reality and something else entirely. So, if you ever find yourself out on a lake, staring at the distant tree line, and you see something you swear wasn't there before. Ask yourself, should you look closer, or should you turn away before it's too late? Because some things don't like to be seen, and some things should stay forgotten. The story takes place in a remote cabin nestled against a murky lake, its history stretching back over 100 years. Locals say the lake is older than the town itself, formed from glacial waters that settled into the land long before people came to claim it. Some say the lake is cursed, that people, have disappeared here without a trace. And sometimes they come back. Our protagonist, let's call him Daniel, isn't superstitious. He's just looking for a quiet weekend away, a chance to escape the noise of the city, breathe in the crisp night air, and let the stillness settle into his bones. He rents the cabin for a long weekend, planning to do some fishing, read a few books, and most importantly, be alone. But from the moment he arrives, something feels off. The lake isn't the sparkling paradise he imagined. Instead, it's eerily still, a sheet of glass that reflects the overcast sky like a dull mirror. No fish jumping, no birds skimming the surface. Just silence. Then, as night falls, the silence is broken. Daniel sits by the fireplace, book in hand, when he hears it. A faint slap against the dock. He ignores it at first, probably just water lapping against the wood. But then it happens again, and again. A steady, rhythmic sound like something is dragging itself out of the water. Curious, he grabs a flashlight and steps onto the porch. The dock extends about 20 feet into the lake, swaying slightly with the wind. But as he scans the light across the water, his breath catches in his throat. There, at the end of the dock, something is moving. A dark shape, hunched and dripping, is crawling onto the wooden planks. It's hard to see in the dim light, but its skin glistens, slick with water and coated in what looks like algae. Daniel feels an overwhelming sense of wrongness, his instincts screaming at him to turn back. But he's frozen, watching. Then the figure stops, and it lifts its head. Its eyes, if they can be called that, are black holes, empty and leaking rivulets of dark water. Its mouth gapes open as if gasping for breath, though no air passes through. And then, in a motion too fast for something that had just been crawling, it lurches toward him. Daniel stumbles back inside, slamming the door shut, heart pounding. He presses himself against the wood, listening, but there's only silence. Then, slap, slap, slap. The sound of wet limbs dragging across the porch. Daniel doesn't sleep. He keeps the lights on, the fire roaring, but the warmth does nothing to push away the bone-deep chill clinging to him. The next day, he convinces himself it was his imagination. The play of shadows on the water, the trick of light from his flashlight. By afternoon, the sun shines a little brighter, and the horror of the previous night seems distant. He decides to stay. But that night, it comes back. This time, the sound starts at the edge of the porch. A slithering, dragging noise that makes his skin crawl. Then, something taps against the window. A slow, deliberate tap, tap, tap. Daniel doesn't move. He doesn't breathe. The window is covered by thin curtains, and through them, he sees a shadow. A hunched figure, its limbs twitching unnaturally, its head tilted too far to one side. And then, it starts whispering. The words are garbled, wet like something trying to form speech through waterlogged lungs. But one thing is clear, it knows his name. Daniel, a guttural, drawn-out croak. Calling. He shuts his eyes. He tells himself this isn't real. But then, the worst sound yet. The doorknob turns. Somewhere in Daniel's mind, he remembers something he read when researching the cabin. A passing comment about the drowned ones. Legend says the lake takes people. Sometimes they drown by accident. Sometimes something else pulls them under. But the true horror is what happens after. Because some of them come back. Not alive. Not dead. Something in between. And they're always looking for someone to join them. Daniel knows he has to leave. He doesn't wait for daylight. He grabs his keys, throws open the door, and the porch is wet. Not from rain. Not from morning dew. But from something that had been there. Something that had crawled across it. He doesn't stop to think. He runs to his car, fumbling with the keys, hands shaking. Just as he unlocks the door, he hears it. Slap, Slap! Slap! Coming from behind him. He doesn't turn around. He doesn't want to see. He throws himself into the car, slamming the door shut, and peels out of the driveway. As he speeds away, his headlights sweep across the cabin one last time. And in the window, it is watching him. A dripping, algae-covered thing, smiling as if it knows something he doesn't. No one has stayed in the cabin since. Some say the lake is hungry, that those who escape it never really leave. And that one day, when Daniel least expects it, he'll hear it again. Slap, 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 coming closer. Because once the lake has touched you, it never lets go. For decades, an old wooden dock stretched over the still, black waters of a forgotten lake. It belonged to a cabin that had long stood vacant, a structure weathered by time and heavy with silence. But despite the emptiness, one thing always remained: a single, creaking rocking chair at the end of the dock. Locals had countless stories about it. Some said it belonged to a man who once lived in the cabin, a fisherman who spent his days watching the lake, his pipe smoke curling into the evening air. Others whispered darker tales, that the chair had been placed there as a warning, that those who dared to sit in it would feel something they could not explain, something they should never invite. The first recorded incident happened in the late 1970s. A young couple, eager for a weekend retreat, rented the cabin despite the warnings from locals. The first night, they sat on the porch, listening to the crickets when they noticed something odd. The rocking chair on the dock was moving, just slightly, just enough to be unnatural. The lake was still, the air was still, and yet the chair creaked back and forth as if someone was sitting in it. Watching, curious and emboldened by the warmth of a few drinks, the boyfriend walked down to the dock. He placed a hand on the chair, stopping its motion. For a moment, everything was quiet, and then it rocked forward on its own. The girlfriend called out to him, telling him to come back, her voice edged with unease. He laughed it off, claiming it was the wind. But as he turned to leave, he felt it, a cold touch on his shoulder. Not the brush of the night air, not the damp mist rising from the lake. A grip, firm and unmistakable. He stumbled back, nearly losing his balance. His girlfriend swore that for a split second, she saw something standing behind him, something that wasn't there when he scrambled back up to the house. They left the next morning. Was it just a trick of the mind, or did something truly reach out from beyond? The dock's legend only grew stronger over the years, as more people began to experience the same thing. There were reports of fishermen seeing the chair moving at dawn, as if someone invisible was greeting the sunrise. Children who dared each other to sit in it would leap up in terror, swearing they felt unseen fingers trace their arms. And then there were the disappearances, people who went out on the lake and never returned, their boats drifting back empty, the rocking chair swaying as if waving them goodbye. One of the most chilling accounts comes from an old park ranger who had lived by the lake his whole life. He had always dismissed the stories, until one night when he was locking up a nearby cabin. He glanced toward the dock and saw the chair moving, slow and steady. But this time he heard something else. Footsteps. Schlossing vet footsteps. Coming from the water. He stood frozen as he watched a single set of wet footprints appear, one after another, leading up to the chair. And then, as if guided by unseen hands, the chair suddenly stopped rocking. Whatever had been there had just sat down. He never returned to that cabin again. So what could be behind these eerie occurrences? Some believe the spirit tied to the chair is that of the fisherman who once lived in the cabin. He was rumored to have drowned one stormy night, lost beneath the black waves. His body was never found. Some say he never really left, that he still watches the lake from his rocking chair, waiting for something or someone. Others believe the chair itself is cursed, that it belonged to a family who owned the land before the lake was even formed. According to local history, the area was flooded to create the lake, swallowing entire homes, graveyards, and roads beneath the water. What if the chair was the only thing left behind? A relic of something much older, something angry? And then there's the most disturbing theory of all, that it is not a ghost sitting in the chair, but something from the lake itself. a presence that has lived in the water far longer than any human settlement. It does not want to be seen. It does not want to be disturbed. But when someone dares to sit in its chair, it pushes them toward the water. The rocking chair on the dock remains a mystery. Some claim it's nothing more than old wood shifting with the wind. Others say it's something far worse, an invitation to join whatever lingers beneath the surface. So if you ever find yourself at an old lake house, staring out at the dock as the sun begins to set, take a moment to look closely. If you see a lone rocking chair moving when there is no wind, turn around. Leave it be, because if you sit in it, you might not be alone. It was an old fishing cabin, the kind that had stood for decades on the water's edge, its wooden frame weathered by time and the relentless lake air. James had bought it on a whim, looking for peace, an escape from the noise of the city. He didn't mind the isolation. In fact, he welcomed it. But the town, small and tight-knit, had been less than welcoming. Not hostile, just cautious. The old men at the bait shop would glance at him sideways when he mentioned moving in. A woman at the grocery store warned him to keep his doors locked at night, but wouldn't say why. And the man who sold him the cabin, an old fisherman named Henry, paused before handing over the keys. "You'll hear things," Henry had said, his voice low and deliberate. "Don't go looking for where it's coming from. And if you hear knocking, twice, real slow, don't answer. No matter what." James had laughed it off. Just a silly superstition, the kind of ghost story people tell newcomers to keep them on edge. But the first storm of the season was coming. And soon, James would realize the warnings weren't just stories. The rain came hard that night, hammering against the tin roof. The wind rattled the windows, making the old house groan like it was alive. James sat by the fireplace, wrapped in a blanket, sipping on a drink as he listened to the storm rage outside. Then, at exactly midnight, there was a sound. Knock, knock. 2 distinct raps against the wooden door. Slow, deliberate. James froze. The fire crackled beside him, but the warmth had left the room. The knocks hadn't come from the front porch, where someone might be seeking shelter from a storm. They came from inside the house, from a back door. Heart pounding, James grabbed a flashlight and crept toward the sound. He told himself it was just the wind, a loose shutter, an old beam settling in the storm. But as he reached the door, he felt it, a deep, bone-chilling cold seeping through the wood. He hesitated. Then, against every instinct screaming at him to stop, he placed his hand against the door. It was wet. James spent the rest of the night in his locked bedroom, refusing to investigate further. By morning, the storm had passed, and sunlight streamed through the windows, making the night before feel like a fever dream. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone, that something had changed. Then he saw them, 2 sets of wet footprints, leading from the back door into the center of the living room, before stopping abruptly, as if the visitor had simply vanished into thin air. James told himself it was a trick of the rain, that the wind must have blown water through a crack in the old wood. But deep down, he knew better. That night, he locked every door, shut every window. And still, at exactly midnight, knock, knock. Over the next few days, James learned more about the lake's dark history. He found an old newspaper article buried in the attic, its edges yellowed with age. The headline sent a shiver down his spine. Mother and son lost to the lake. Bodies never recovered. According to the article, decades ago, a woman and her young child had lived in the very same cabin. One night, during a terrible storm, the boy had wandered too close to the water. His mother had jumped in to save him, but neither was ever seen again. Some say the lake took them. Others say something else did. The legend of the drowned ones had started soon after. Locals whispered that on stormy nights, the mother and child returned to the cabin, seeking warmth, seeking home. And when they knocked, twice, it was a plea to be let inside, a plea that must never be answered. James was a skeptic, but skepticism doesn't keep the dead away. And on the 3rd night, when the storm returned with a vengeance, the knocking came again, louder this time, more insistent. Knock, knock. He covered his ears, willed it to stop. But then, the doorknob turned. James did the only thing he could. He ran. He threw open the front door and sprinted into the rain, not caring about the storm, not caring about the mud beneath his feet. He reached his truck, fumbling with the keys, heart slamming in his chest. Then he heard it, the sound of water. Not the rain, not the waves, but something else. Something dripping, something breathing. Slowly, he turned back toward the house. And there, standing on the porch, were two figures. A woman, her hair clinging to her face, water pouring from her clothes, her empty eyes locked onto him. And beside her, a small, frail child, holding her hand. James didn't wait to see what happened next. He left everything behind, peeling out onto the road, never looking back. The lake house remains empty, the doors still locked. But sometimes, on stormy nights, passers-by say they hear something over the sound of the wind. Knock, knock, a quiet, desperate plea. The drowned ones still searching for a way home. And maybe, just maybe, still waiting for someone to answer. It began with an old fisherman, a man who had spent decades casting his line into the deep waters of a seemingly ordinary lake. He knew its currents, its wildlife, its every whisper in the wind. But what he saw one early morning, just as the mist hovered above the water, would change the way he looked at the lake forever. He swore that while fishing at the lake's center, he noticed something strange, a glimpse of something unnatural just beneath the surface. At first, he thought it was a trick of the light, the sun glinting off submerged debris. But as he peered closer, his stomach twisted in dread. There, beneath the water's glassy surface, was the unmistakable outline of a cabin roof. The fisherman wasn't the first to notice something eerie about this lake. The locals had always spoken in hushed tones about its past, about the town that had once stood where the water now stretched. Decades ago, before the lake expanded, the government had approved a project that would flood several nearby areas to create a reservoir. Homes, stores, and even a church had been abandoned and left to drown beneath the rising waters. Some residents had resisted, refusing to leave until the very last moment. Some swore they would never abandon their homes, no matter what came. And when the floodwaters came, it was rumored that not all of them had escaped in time. Since then, strange stories had surfaced over the years. Boaters who felt something brush against their oars in the dead of night. Divers who swore they heard muffled voices bubbling up from the depths. And the occasional sighting of eerie lights flickering just beneath the surface, as if the old town was still alive in some ghostly echo of the past. But no one had ever claimed to actually see the buildings before. Until now, when the fisherman returned to shore, he shared what he had seen with a few locals. Some laughed it off, saying it was just an old folk tale. Others, however, exchanged knowing glances, whispering among themselves. An elderly man eventually stepped forward, his voice shaky. "You saw it, didn't you?" he asked. "The town, it doesn't rest." Determined to prove to himself that he wasn't losing his mind, the fisherman returned to the same spot the next morning, just as the mist was rising again. He leaned over the boat, peering into the lake's depths. And there it was, the roof, its wooden shingles rotted with time, its chimney still standing defiantly against the water's pressure. And then something moved. At first, it was just a shadow shifting beneath the roof. Then, unmistakably, the fisherman saw the outline of a hand, a pale, waterlogged hand pressing up against one of the submerged cabin's windows. It was impossible. No one had lived in that cabin for over half a century. And yet, something inside was reaching for the surface. There's something deeply unsettling about the idea of an entire town existing beneath the water, forever lost but never truly gone. Perhaps it's because the concept taps into an ancient fear that what we abandon never really leaves us. Or maybe it's the idea that we, as humans, build homes and create lives, believing that they will last forever, only for nature, or something far darker, to reclaim them in the end. Submerged towns are not just a horror story trope. They exist in reality. Entire communities have been sacrificed to lakes and reservoirs, their remnants still preserved beneath the water, waiting. And in some cases, as divers have discovered, even entire cemeteries have been left behind, with their inhabitants still resting beneath the murky depths. What happens when the restless spirits of the displaced refuse to stay buried? Do they linger beneath the surface, watching, waiting for someone to remember them? Or do they reach out, just like the hand in the cabin's window? The fisherman never returned to that part of the lake again. He never cast his line near that spot, nor did he ever speak of what he saw a second time. But there were rumors, whispers among the townfolk, that something followed him home that night. Neighbors claimed they would sometimes hear him talking to himself in the dead of night, muttering about the water, about the cabin, about the thing inside. One morning, he was found sitting in his boat, drifting aimlessly in the middle of the lake. His fishing rod was still in his hands, his eyes wide open, staring blankly at the water. He never spoke again. Did he truly see a sunken cabin, or was it the result of an old man's tired mind playing tricks on him? And if it was real, if something still lingers beneath the surface of that forgotten town, then what else might be waiting below? Perhaps you will never know for sure. But the next time you find yourself by a lake, staring into its depths, remember this: some places don't forget, some places don't forgive, and sometimes the past is only a breath away, just beneath the surface.